for the Instagram to go. It one. There it goes. Yay! Okay, awesome. So welcome to another Inspiration Behind the Stories. I'm here with Sara Hailstone, and we will be putting out her fantastic novel, Wretched, in May of this year. And I can't wait for us to get that out there. So we're just going to jump right into it, right? Because the whole purpose of this is to kind of get the inside scoop as to like what the inspiration was for this. So what was the moment that made you say, oh my gosh, I have got to write this book?
Wretched began, I actually wrote a short story in high school, and it was titled Breaking the Chain. And just from that short story, I knew one day that there would be more writing that would be layered with that short story. So throughout the years, and especially after I finished my undergrad, I sat down after my undergrad more confident, thinking, okay, I can do this. I can write a novel now. And that's when Wretched, I sat down seriously and started writing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what first sparked the story itself, the story of Wretched?
The dynamics of relationship in my life, as well as in my family, and observing and growing up and observing the women around me. But specifically with Wretched, there was a moment that I lived with my grandmother, and I came across, when I was moving in some of my stuff, two cloth stars of David in her basement in a clay canister. And I was shocked. I had known her history. She had immigrated to Canada from Belgium after World War II. And I knew that history. I also knew the history that she was a war bride. But this was new, and this was another layer. So I took the stars upstairs for safekeeping, and I presented them to her. I showed them to her, and
Wow.
that took on a whole other understanding of relationship and dynamic and women in my life.
Now,
that would be,
sorry, go ahead.
that would have been my mid-20s when that happened.
What was her reaction to you presenting her with those stars?
She said they were David's, and then she opened up and she went back. She was a painter. It was really cute. She went back into her studio and she brought back papers, and we used to have really good conversations around her kitchen table. And we sat, and she showed me these papers that she had been keeping, and they were letters from an internment camp. And they were letters from David to her when they were in their 20s. And they were surviving occupied Brussels.
Wow. Oh my. So why this story now? Why do you feel as though it's important now?
Well, to be honest, this was writing that I had done in my 20s. I am 39 now. I finished Wretched, the first draft of it, before I was 28. So it feels a little bit like a time warp that the novel is out now, and it's almost 10 years later, in my development, right, and growth. I'm a mother now, and I just, it was there inside of me, and I had to get it out. And there's other dynamics within the story, and a part of family and growing up in Canada, in rural Canada. It's just something I knew I needed to write.
Um, Now, a lot of authors, when they're writing something that's of significance for them, they feel as though there are certain questions or topics that they need to address, that they need to get out. For you,
Mhm.
what were those questions? What were those topics?
I, I was not anticipating the narrative point of view, especially writing from my 20s. I was not pregnant. Yet I had not experienced being pregnant or childbirth. But the voice, the female voice that came through, that delivered the story and wove that story in with the dual timeline. So there's um, a timeline existing in the present, and that is spoken from the character Nell. And she is pregnant, and she's delivering this family history and story to her unborn daughter. And then the historical timeline exists of what would be based on my grandmother's life surviving occupied Brussels and then subsequently moving or immigrating to Canada after the war, and what her experience was like as a woman in the 50s and the 60s, assimilating and becoming used to rural Canadian society. It was a shock for her to go from Brussels to a small rural community in northern Ontario.
Mm. Now, taking 100 steps back, um, who is the story about?
Originally, the first couple drafts, they were based on my navigation as a young woman of the family history I was learning of as I was growing up.
Mhm.
And it took me 10 years to write Wretched. Um, 4 or 5 drafts later, the story became my grandmother's. And I think also that that solidified with her passing. She passed at almost 97 years old.
Mm.
Um, and I didn't realize it with the first draft of the novel that it was not done. There was still parts of the story that needed to be told and shaped, and that carried on her death and after her death.
Wow. Now, within the narrative itself, what's at stake if things go wrong?
In the novel or my life?
How about both?
I usually I usually research questions and have a script, and I have not had time.
Ah, oh, you're
Yeah,
fine.
I will focus, and it's been a long day. I will focus on. To me, there's maybe another layer of character arc that I'd like to explore, maybe in other writing in the future, and that would be the character that was based on David. And he, in the novel, is surviving with the character based on my grandmother, and they are hidden away in an apartment in Brussels. And I I've studied history and I plan a lot, but there are things that I find that do surprise you when you're writing, and your
Mm.
characters reveal, layers of themselves to you you weren't anticipating would show. So with David's character, there was a clash with truth and reality, and then also with fiction. Uh, and maybe I shouldn't reveal too many spoilers, but his character plot forks, and there's many moments in the novel where that happens, where um, creatively I played around with readers would have to question, is this the reality, is this what happened, or is this the reality, is this what happened, because one plot thread is based on reality and one is based on fiction. So the reality for him, my grandmother found after the war. So they hid together, and then he was found out and turned in, and he
Mhm.
was taken to an internment camp in north of Brussels. So it's a place called Mechelin, and he did escape from there, and there are historical records that show that, and I find it's such inspiring history because this was nearing the mid to end of the war. Some of the cattle cars, the bottom of the trains were rotted out, and they
Oh,
kicked
wow.
through the bottom of the cattle cars and got out and escaped. So that did happen, and he was recaptured. But my grandmother never knew what happened of him until after the war, and she would tell this part of the story that she had been on a streetcar. She got on a streetcar in Brussels, and his sister was on the streetcar, and she asked how he was, and the sister said he did not survive. He was taken to Auschwitz, and that's the truth. That's his reality. But in the novel, I play around with the idea that he could have lived or he could not have lived. I don't know if I pulled it off, but it's there. But
I'm sure that you did.
oh,
So.
I don't know.
What kind of I mean, this is a very emotive piece. What kind of an emotional ride can a reader anticipate?
I wonder if I should have put trigger warnings in. There are moments and there are episodes and scenes within the novel that could be upsetting. And I have had one reviewer say that there were some moments that she did become emotional. So I almost challenge someone to read through it and get to the end of it, because it's not a beach read. It's not an easy read. And that's the tone of the novel, and that's to honor the authenticity of the story. So.
Understood. Now, I mean, if I were you, I would have had a very difficult time writing this, just due to the nature of the truth that you're revealing within it and the history that you're playing with. What were the hardest parts to really dive into?
It was healing. It was very cathartic, especially as a young woman. My family, we are not perfect. We've overcome domestic violence, and we've done a lot of healing. It's incredible to be at this stage of my life and say that we're getting better. We've gotten better, and we are happy, and we can enjoy each other as a family. But as a young woman in my 20s, there was pain in writing through those layers of our lives. It was healing. There's still some loose ends with the novel. I could see later on in my life, there's more archival work that I need to do. And there's unanswered questions with the novel. And the narrators are also unreliable narrators. And I did that on purpose so that it's not an autobiography. This is literary fiction. And I wanted this space, the freedom in that emotional space to heal, but to work through that. And it's just what came out while I was writing. There is one scene though, and there's a mother in the scene, and she sets a house on fire with her children inside.
Oh my.
That was hard to write. And there's part of my family history I wish I could reach out and find other family members. My father was adopted, and the family was scattered, essentially. And slowly over the decades, family members have been able to find their way back to each other, but there's pain that separates them as well. So that was difficult to write through.
I can imagine. Where were you? I mean, because you're talking about a decade span in which you were writing the story. Where were you in your life as you were writing it, and how do you feel as though it changed you?
When I graduated from my undergraduate degree, mid-20s, I took the summer to write, and then that fall I would start my master's in history. I was also in a long-term relationship, so there was very much that stability and space to focus on the novel. But in my own personal trajectory, the writing aligned with the evolution of my studies, and as I
Hmm.
was my way through.
Oh, wow.
And
That's fascinating.
it's just I've now having had two daughters, and they're both 6 and 5 now, and having two stepchildren who are older. I it's kind of to look back and read the narrative point of view of a woman who was pregnant. I find that interesting that that voice came to me while
Mm.
I had not been pregnant yet, and luckily I wouldn't change too much from what my experience. I would like to. I'll continue on writing and exploring pregnancy through a female point of view with more authenticity. But I did have in my early 20s, I did read the first draft of the prologue then in a cafe
Mhm.
to an audience. And I did have positive comments after from women in the audience who had been pregnant. Um, and it was actually quite beautiful because when I read the prologue at that time, there was a baby that was babbling in the audience. And it wasn't disruptive. It was actually as if there was, if this baby was, contributing a reciprocal dialogue with the novel. So I remember that as well. It resonated with me.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. Um, what do you feel surprised you the most while you were writing this?
The ending, um,
Mm.
and not anticipating that I would weave in the character's life, based on her passing
Mm.
later on.
Understood. Was there a character that you found more challenging than others to write, to express?
The character based on my grandmother.
Mm.
Um, Reading back through, I don't know if I fully did a good job representing what her actual personality was like in real life.
Mhm.
I I read through, and sometimes it feels more she's she became more of a fictive character, and I wonder if that's also a reflection of coping during the writing process and basing this novel on real life.
Mhm.
Um, and also writing the character that would have based on my grandfather as well. Um, and wondering if the novel finished that would honor the authenticity of the lives of the people in real life compared to the fictive characters.
Mhm.
My grandfather would have taken the shape of the antagonist in the novel. And then as I get older and I'm parenting and I have my own children now, more memories come back of my grandfather that are quite positive. And that's not represented in the novel.
Mhm.
Uh, and there was also a moment with the character based on my grandmother in when she was in the setting of occupied Brussels, where because of the immense trauma of the war and what has happened with the character based on David, her psyche almost splits. And
Mm.
it's almost like a psychosis where it looks like there's two characters that are existing, but one's actually a psychological representation. And I remember when we were editing, I said, this might not work.
Mhm.
This might not function well. And if it's not functioning well, let's take it out. But it
Mhm.
stayed. It made it through that character.
Mm. And actually, that is a lovely lead into the next question.
Okay.
What almost didn't make it into the book, and why did you keep it in?
That almost this psyche split almost did not
Mm.
make it into the novel. Uh, just feeling a little insecure that I might have taken too much creative liberty and creative license with the narrative and not the history student and history major in me is like, what are you doing? This doesn't happen. And then the English major is like, it's kind of ironic. I paralleled that. But English major is like, you have this space, just go with this. And the character does not interact with other figures in the book. So you could almost get through a reading and maybe not pick up on the fact that that character does not exist, but that character is there to challenge my grandmother's character, and it sort of pushes her into the next phase of her life of meeting my grandfather after the war. They both met during liberation. He was a Canadian soldier, and they married there. And he came back to Canada, and then she went to Canada alone, arrived alone.
Wow. I have to ask, so why the title Wretched?
There was a moment writing, and the description came out in the writing, and the prologue that exists with Wretched now was not written in a linear or chronological order. When I first started, it was not a part of the first draft. The first draft started, I think, in a paragraph in chapter 1, and it was I've seen your death so many times now, and it's the pregnant protagonist referring to menstruation, and then it would go into a very maternal and that perspective of her speaking to her unborn child. And then later the word came out, Wretched came out when writing. And then that felt to me like the echo or ripple of the prologue. And then that's where I went and added the prologue that traced through the etymology of the word wretched. And it framed the family narrative within the novel.
Understood. Wow, that's stunning. Who do you feel will fall hardest, be most engaged?
I don't know. Okay. Those readers who love literary fiction, those readers who love the blending of poetry and fiction, Canlit readers, and historical fiction.
And is there anything that readers to date have said that they just completely were not expecting?
I don't know, because to be honest, I haven't had much feedback. I've had 3 or 4 responses. I did have a positive comment about the poetry, and I was really happy to receive that. As a writer, it's very, you write in isolation. It's very solitary. So sometimes I don't know if it's good.
Oh, don't worry, we would tell you.
That was helpful. That was helpful for me. It's also my first novel, right? It's my debut novel. I've had short stories and poetry published, but this is the first longer work of my writing that's been published. And when I was younger, when I did first read that prologue in the cafe, I felt good when the women approached me and they said, that representation of how you are speaking about the growth of the fetus in the womb, that's really well done. And I thought, okay, I can keep writing this novel because it's not done. I have maybe the prologue or a couple chapters done. So
Understood. And it's interesting. I feel like every author experiences that at some point. There comes a point especially in the initial draft, if not along the lines of as you're revising it, where you feel like, should I even be writing this? Like, what does and the question could arise from personal insecurity to really just is this a topic that I have a right to represent? And getting that feedback can be such a turning point
Mm-hmm.
to get to enable you to say, okay, yeah, no, this is okay. I'm allowed to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were many moments where I wrote for myself as a healing process, and I did when I was younger. I did receive feedback within the community that perhaps I shouldn't write this novel. It's my grandmother's story, and I shouldn't take the liberty to write the story for her.
Mm-hmm.
But I still pushed through and kept writing. It's just, it's almost as if I had to write this first before I could move on and write other things and evolve as a writer. But there are layers within the various drafts over those 10 years where I have taken segments out that connect with people who are still alive today. And I wanted the final draft and the finished and the polished draft to focus on the historical timeline and the historical plot line that centers on my grandmother.
Understood. So if someone starts reading this, they get maybe 20 pages in. What keeps them going?
For me, is I love the sections that are titled Ripple, and those are the sections that will break down into more poetic poetry pieces or poetry fragments. As well, I found it compelling to write David, the character based on David, uh, his plot line in. I had not encountered a plot line like that before, and in my own more creative writing, that he was surviving from inside an internment camp, and what that would have felt like, what that would have felt like when you actually escaped a cattle car and still got caught.
Mm.
And there's controversy around writing that because I'm objective and I'm writing from the outside. I will never know. There may be some ethical questions about that as well. And the sections that break down into the storyteller sections, that's the narrative point of view with a more feminine or sacred feminine voice. I found that inspiring. So I think some readers, they might connect with that as well.
Understood. Now, in one sentence, why should someone pick up this book?
In one sentence.
Okay, two.
I was going to make a Game of Thrones joke, but I can't. No. I think even though this was written 10 years ago, it will connect with shifting dynamics within the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, honestly, as always, Sara, just truly love catching up with you and having an opportunity to chat about the background of Wretched and the inspirations behind this dark but truly gorgeous story. So anyone watching, please feel free, go online. It is available for pre-order, and definitely check out this just truly fantastic story. So
Hey, Lisa.
thank you.